Hello and welcome to our conversational fluency presentation. So, conversational fluency, it means the ability to interact in another language, but really more commonly we're going to talk about communication in general first. So what is communication? Well, it's derived from the Latin word communis, which means to share, and we can share it many different ways. We can exchange thoughts, feelings, ideas, messages, and information through different channels: speech, visuals, signals, our behaviors, our voice, our sounds, our gestures, facial expressions and nodding, think of that, writing, listening, and body language. It's a way to transmit a message from a sender to a receiver and back. There are three parts to this process that you can think about. What the sender of the message means. In other words, I might say, "Hey, how are you?" But what I mean is hello, because that's what that kind of means in American English. Now, what the sender's message says is, "Hey, how are you?" And the receiver may hear or interpret it differently than it was meant. And that often happens when you're learning a second language. Now, there are two ways to think about communication. One is the communication channel and styles and purpose. In the communication channel, we have the verbal and the nonverbal channels. The verbal is oral, so speaking and listening, visual, and written. The nonverbal, or the paraverbal and paraverbal, are facial expressions, gestures, body language, silence even, and tone of voice. And did you know that about 70% of all of our communication are those nonverbal things? So we really want to make our learners and students aware of those nonverbal elements. Then there's the styles and purpose, which, communication for more formal settings, i.e. going to office hours, or informal settings, i.e. going to the coffee shop, or more direct speech versus indirect speech. And we have to remember here that the level of directness varies cross-culturally and situationally. So it might be perfectly fine for me to say, "Give me a coffee" in Bosnia, where I'm from, but it may not be so fine to do that here in the United States. And so our learners and students, they don't always intuitively know what is considered polite. Now let's talk about nonverbal communication. So we have a quick summary here so you can visually see it. And it's about pausing, intonation, tone of voice, body posture, body gestures, and eye movement. So think about all of those things and what kind of elements you tend to use. For example, I use a lot of facial expressions when I talk, as you will see in the video modules coming up. Now, the IELP learner profile, I want you to consider two things. The international students and language learners in general are often multilingual, and they know a lot about language learning. For example, they might know a lot more about English grammar than the average person whose first language is English. Why? Well, they study it formally and extensively. Some students are quick to provide synonyms for words, similar words for another word, because they have been practicing it for so long. And others do a great job of noticing patterns like, "Hey, why is it garbage, but then it's garage, but they're spelled the same, G-E at the end? What are these sounds? What's going on? Why are they different?" And they have a lot of good questions. So it will be really interesting for you to engage with an international student and see the world through their eyes. Number two, it's important that we position the language learners as autonomous. They are already fluent in at least one language, and they are ready to grow and expand their linguistic portfolio by adding English. In other words, the language learner is already an expert at many things, including another language. So find out what they're an expert at and let them teach you. So how can conversation partners help? Well, a great way for IELP students to practice authentic conversation while being made aware of all these linguistic and paralinguistic features we mentioned is through the Conversation Partner program. The number one goal of a language learner is to be a fluent speaker. So we need to keep that in mind. And learners can become more fluent early on if they're exposed to interactional strategies such as paraphrasing, in other words, saying things different ways, asking for clarification when they didn't understand something or when they want more information, and expressing interest, learning how to have a conversation where they are more engaged and they are offering recognizable strategies for listening, such as conversation continuers and filler words. Or yeah, oh, cool. So we want to teach these kinds of strategies to our students because they're fun to use and they become more confident when they master them. Now, fluency versus accuracy. What is fluency? What is accuracy? I think that creating a balance is the goal ultimately, but in the conversation partner rooms and meetings, we focus on free speaking, i.e. fluency. It's the overall oral proficiency. Now, the fluent speaker may know 20 to 40,000 words, but needs only about 3,000 words for basic conversational fluency. The learner usually who is fluent speaks easily, quickly, with few pauses and with very little hesitation. So you will start to see a pattern as you talk to your conversation partners. You will start seeing, oh, okay, this person is hesitating a little bit. This person is including a lot of pauses. They're thinking about what they're going to say. They're taking a little bit longer to process what they're hearing and what they're going to put together. So it's important to pay attention to that so that you can adjust your speech to match where they're at. Now, a fluent speaker tests out new vocabulary and expressions, even if the grammar is inaccurate. That's really important. And the learner usually understands more English than they speak. That's just general truth. Most of our students can follow very well, usually, but when it comes to speaking, they're more shy. And so the goal is to be intelligible. The goal is not to be grammatically correct. Whereas in correct speaking, i.e. accuracy, the learner speaks correctly with very few grammar mistakes. They're exact, precise, freedom from error. Words are spelled and pronounced correctly. Language is appropriate to the situation or context. The speech is clear and articulate, and the learner sounds capable and credible. So a mix of these two is ultimately the goal. But we focus on fluency or free speaking, just allowing the student to say things. The mission of the conversation tutor is as following. Interactive nature between tutor and student promotes learning. The impact of tutoring session is based on how well the interaction is carried out. The session should be focused, intentional, and equip students with skills for negotiation of meaning and other conversational strategies. The session should reposition students as competent speakers and autonomous learners. So this is really a framework through which we even made this presentation and through which we have made this training website. It really is true that you as a conversation partner, tutor, or volunteer will directly contribute to the student learning. And you will position the student in a way that they feel more confident and safe to speak with you, to practice, to ask questions they normally wouldn't ask of somebody else about speaking. And you will equip them with explicit skills that you can talk about, that they can go out into the real world and use and come back and report to you how it went. So it really is about the interaction and how well it's carried out, and that's why we created this training program, so that you can start thinking about what makes an excellent conversation moderator and tutor, while at the same time exchanging meaningful conversation with your student friend and having an authentic type of exchange that will still generate skills for both you and your conversation partner.